Okay, good evening. Welcome to tonight's shir. Tonight is going to be a shir in three parts, all going to be uploaded separately. But the first one is the Halacha slot, where we're going to continue our discussion about the Shadchan in Halacha and the Shadchan's fee. Just to recap some of the things we mentioned briefly last week, is first of all that it's a tremendous mitzvah to be involved in shidduchim. It's godly work. We are imitating HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Not only is it v'ahavta l'recha kamocha, but it's also a fulfillment of v'halachta b'dracha. We follow in Hashem's ways, mahu rachum, afat rachum, etc., etc. And we know that HaKadosh Baruch Hu made the first ever shidduch, Adam to Chava. Moreover, the Medrash says in a couple of places that the famous case of the noblewoman, the Roman noblewoman, who came to Rabbi Yossi ben Bar Chalafta and said, how long did it take HaKadosh Baruch Hu to create the world? 6 days. What's he been doing since then? And one of the answers is he's been mezaveg zivugim. He's been involved in shidduchim, and therefore being involved in shidduchim is imitating HaKadosh Baruch Hu and really is godly work. So much so, to the extent that one actually can do it on Shabbos, even though that normally involved in Mekach or Memka. You can even discuss the financial arrangements because of its importance. And we sing about it in Zmiris. We say in Mayedidus, we say, Uleshadei Chabonos. What does the word Shidduch mean? Well, it means either two sources. Either it means peaceful, that's what the Ran in Shabbos says, or it means shidduch means to bind together. The Aruch, the Balamar, and others say that. We also discussed last week that there are two types of Shadchan, where the parents approach the Shadchan, or where the Shadchan approaches the parents. They're treated differently in Halacha, that was last week's shir. And various practical differences, lo solin, when to pay, what happens chas v'shalom in a broken engagement. Are they still liable their fee? It depends on the type of arrangement. If the parents approach the Shadchan, which has got a din of a schir kablon, or whether the Shadchan approaches the parents, which is yored l'teich sodeu. That was last week's shir. What I want to discuss today are a few questions. The first question is, who pays? Whose obligation is it? Is it the parents or is it the children? So take a look at paragraph 2c. If you've got the handout in front of you, if you haven't, email me at j.golker@gmail.com. I'll happily send you the handout. The Avnei Nezer says in Necheshin Mishpat Siman Lamed Vav, Kizeh Poshet Shechiyuv Shatchonus Chal Al Hachosen V'Hakala. It's Poshet that the obligation, the responsibility to pay the Shadchan falls on the Chosen and Kala themselves, Kilohem Osa Hatova, because they are the main beneficiaries. Rak shamachutonim mishalmin avura, i.e., that there is become like an established practice nowadays that the parents actually pay, to the extent that if one side, for whatever reason, refuses to pay, then the Shadchan can't claim against the Chosen and the Kala, because the minhag has become so accepted for the parents to pay. That is quoting the Eirich Shai, as I've got there in the notes. Rav Belsky Zatzal does point out that in a situation where the parents are totally detached from the shidduch process, then in that situation, then it would fall upon the children to pay. He says, "Achiyuv l'shalom d'mei hashadchonos mutla lahorim." Like we said before, the minhag is that it falls on the parents. Ele imkein ein shum kesher bein haben oyabas lahoreim, unless there's no attachment whatsoever between the children and the parents. V'habonim misaskim b'chol tzorchei nisueim ba'atzmam, and the children are sort of overseeing this aspect of their lives totally independently of their parents. Oz kagam tashlum d'mei hashadchonos mutaleim. In that situation, then the minhag will revert, and it will be the children, i.e. the chosen and kala, their responsibility. Okay. He does add that even though the minhag is that the parents pay, for whatever reason, if the parents don't pay, toy v'roish yisham ha'abonim, then it's appropriate that the children pay in their stead. Which side pays? Is it the chosen side? Is it the kala side? The minhag is that each side pay half of the shadchonos. That is the accepted minhag. A lot of the halachas about financial arrangements and shidduchim is based on minhag amok and minhag hazman, and therefore the custom nowadays is each side pay half of the shadchonos, and that is true even if one side, the shadchan, could be busy with one side more than the other. You can have a situation where after the first date the guy comes back and he is head over heels, he's ready to go ahead and to propose and to get engaged, and she is perhaps not so ready. and then for the next several months, the Shadchan could be spending hours on the phone with the girl and the girl's side, and maybe she just checks in. The Shadchan just checks in with the boy's side, every few weeks, and he's still ready to get engaged. He's good to go, and then eventually, let's say they do get engaged. You still split the fee, even though she spent perhaps literally minutes on the phone with the chosen side, but hours and hours with the girl's side. That's just life, and therefore sometimes if it goes like that, so be it. And that is true that they each pay half, even if the Shadchan spent more on one side. If one side can't afford to pay, and it doesn't revert to the other side to make up that 50%. It's not sort of like a joint liability. And if one side doesn't pay, then it goes to the other side. If one side can't afford to pay, then the other side is not obligated to pay the entire sum. However, the Shadchan and Shuvah's Beis Yitzchok says that it's appropriate they should pay something just to appease the Shadchan. That's in Even Oezas Siman Kuf Tes Vav in Chelek Aleph. That's in the footnotes at the bottom. Okay, now how much does one actually have to pay? Well, the Aruch HaShulchan says that in his day, this is, 150 years ago in Eastern Europe, the Aruch HaShulchan says, Schar HaShatchonis, this is in paragraph 2e, B'schar HaShatchonis noitlin mischum ha'gadol shel ha'nedunya v'yesh mekoyim shemeshalmin chamisha chalokim l'meya. Which means that the Aruch HaShulchan says the practice in his day was that they would pay 5% of the nedunya. The nedunya is the dowry. So let's say they were giving the young couple a sum of, say, £10,000 as a dowry payment to begin married life. Then 5% of that would be £500. So it was a proportion of the nedunya. However, in the Sefer Nisuin Kehilchasa, he says there in page Kufayin Dalet, in Ois Tesvav, Schar HaShatchonis Mishtalemes Kaminah HaKamokim V'Hazman. It all depends on the minhag of the place and of the time of that situation. Ve'ein hevdel beinim HaShatchan ishkiya harbe avoda, etc., like we said above. So it very much depends on the minhag HaMokim and the time and the place of where the shidduch takes place. What about multiple Shadchanim? What about a situation where one person, his idea, it was his or her idea, and then another Shadchan actually, runs with it and manages the whole situation until they get engaged? How does that work? And sometimes you can have many Shadchanim. So that is again dealt with by the Aruch HaShulchan. If you look at box number 2F, V'haminhag, says the Aruch HaShulchan, Shahamaschil noitel mechza v'hagoymer mechza, that the person who began it, whose idea it was, and then encouraged them, they sort of got them to go out, he or she will take half. V'hagomer, and the person who finishes it off, concludes it, will get mechza. Now, what about people in the middle? You can have a person whose idea it was, and they actually make the suggestion, set it up, they go out once, and then they perhaps hand it over to another person, and then someone else finishes it off, or there could be lots of people in the interim. So the Aruch HaShulchan says that the minhag is you give the maskil, the person who initiates it, and perhaps, whose idea it was, and then actually sets it up, and then the person who concludes it, they share it 50-50. However, Misha Osku be'emtz medina ein lohem klum. According to the strict halacha, the people in the middle haven't got any claims whatsoever. However, the minhag is to give them something. They get the bottle of l'chaim, they get the flowers for Shabbos, but they don't actually get a share of the Shadchanos. Can a Shadchan be a witness to the Kiddushin? That's a very interesting question. It's actually a machlokas haposkim. The Halichas Yisrael says they can, so long as they're not a relative, then they can. However, the Oitza haposkim says no, but b'diavad the kiddushin is valid, but they should not be a witness to the kiddushin. B'didi hava uvda. I had once a situation. I've made one shidduch in my life. Please God, I should make more. But one time I did make a shidduch, and they honored me to be the aid for kiddushin. I was not aware of the debate amongst the poskim. This is going back a long time, and it took place here in London in the Kinlos Shul. So imagine the big Kinlos Shul. I was standing right at the back of the shul. I don't think I was aware that I was being honored to be an aid for kiddushin, and I hear my name being called up. And I was introduced to the Rosh Hashiva who was being Mesadik Kiddushin earlier at the Tish. It was a very close friend of mine who was getting married, and he introduced me to his Rosh Hashiva. And he said that I introduced him, I was the Shadchan. and my name is called from the back of this very large shul, and I walk all the way to the front, onto the chuppah, and suddenly the Rosh Yeshiva looks up, and it sounded to me like a very loud voice. He just shouted out, Posel le'edus, which I hope people were done lekaf schus, and they said I was posel le'edus because I was the Shadchan and for no other reason. I remember the father of the Chassan was very kind and said, you don't have to do the walk of shame and walk all the way back. You can just stay here. And somebody else under the chuppah just stood in and was the aid for kiddushin. Anyway, so Shadchan being a witness is a machlokas. Aposkim, there are those in Halichas Yisrael is materit, but others are not. What about international shidduchim? What about a situation where, let's say, the going rate for shadchanos in, let's say, America is more than it is in England, which perhaps is more than it is in Israel? So how does that work? Let's say it's £1,000 here in England to pay the shadchan, that's their going rate, let's say, and in America maybe it's £3,000, and in Eretz Yisrael maybe it's £500. So what happens if the chassan and kala from different locations, how do they arrange it? So there's a tshuva of the Ponim Meiras, which is brought, and he basically says this: Klala de Milsa, the rule generally is, if the chassan is living in a place where the shadchanos is lower, is cheaper, so for example, let's say the kala is from America where they pay a slightly higher shadchanos, and the guy is from Eretz Yisrael where they pay a lower rate, that's a lower going rate. And the shadchan's from Eretz Yisrael, so she lives in the place of the chassan where the rate for shadchanos is lower. You actually pay the lower rate in that situation. And he gives a very interesting rationale. You would have thought that the kala lives in America, she has to pay the higher rate. But the lo miboy mitzat kala she'ein mashlim el b'makom hazol, she certainly has to pay the cheaper rate. Why? Mipnei she'oso lahem pula b'makom hazol. Because the work done for her was done in Eretz Yisrael, sort of a bit counterintuitive, because the phone calls and everything that was done on behalf of the kala, finding out about the chassan and dealing with that, took place in the cheaper place. So her 50%, as it were, is actually cheaper. Even though the chassan who lives in Eretz Yisrael is getting the shadchan to do work in America, and therefore that's the higher price. Since the shadchan lives in the place of the chassan in Eretz Yisrael, in this case, in my example, which is the cheaper place, in they have accepted that as the minhag hamakam. Avol, he carries on, if the shadchan was living in the more expensive place, and let's say that both the chassan and the kala come from Nisratzu Hastodim Mechuyav, and they agree to hire this expensive shadchan. So it all depends, on the particularities of the case. Of course, it can all be discussed, and perhaps it should be discussed in advance to avoid any surprises and upsets. And it depends, like the Nisum Kilchasim says, everything is kaminag hamokum v'hazman, according to the time and the place. Much is dependent on minag, but those are some of the sort of the halachas about the shadchan's fee. Just to summarize, great mitzvah to be involved in shidduchim. The shadchan fee, there are two types of halachic arrangements where the parents approach the shadchan, that's a schir kablan, and where the shadchan approaches the parents, that's yored l'toch sodeu, and nafkamin, as we discussed last week, when to pay broken engagements, lo solin, etc., etc. Who pays? Well, the halacha seems to be that it's an obligation on the chassan and kala themselves, but the minhag has become very prevalent now to such an extent that it's adaita to hochi also, that this is an accepted under practice, that it's the parents who actually pay. And which side? Well, it seems to be the minhag is 50-50 nowadays, but lots of permutations to that. How much do you pay? Again, according to Nisuin Kilchasan, it depends on the Mokum and the Zman, it all depends on local custom. But in the times of the Aruch HaShulchan, it was a percentage of the dowry that was being given. Multiple Shadchanim we discussed, again the Aruch HaShulchan says it's the initiator and the concluder who gets to share it, and the people in between not. There are other permutations of that, if there were lots of people who give the ideas and etc. There isn't time to go through all of that. International Shidduchim we spoke about, and the Shadchan being a witness is again a machlokas. What Emes Hashem we will discuss next week is very important halachas about shidduch information. What can be revealed, what must not be revealed, what must be revealed. Emes Hashem we will discuss that next week.